The void between stars held its breath as something extraordinary approached. Deep in the neutral zone of the Kepler expanse, where three major galactic civilizations maintained their uneasy peace, space itself seemed to ripple with anticipation. The Nexus Collective had called for this gathering, sending their most elaborate diplomatic vessels to witness what they believed would be another routine first contact ceremony. Ambassador Velthar adjusted the ceremonial robes of his species, the flowing silver fabric catching the light of distant stars through the observation deck of the massive diplomatic cruiser, Eternal Harmony. His elongated features bore the calm confidence of someone who had overseen dozens of first contact protocols. The Nexus Collective prided itself on being the galaxy's premier diplomatic force, bringing newly discovered species into the fold of galactic civilization with practiced ease. The primitive signals we intercepted suggest a species barely capable of interstellar travel, Velthar mused to his aide, a younger member of his species whose enthusiasm often bordered on naivety. Their technology appears crude, their social structures chaotic. This should be straightforward. General Korvex, the military observer assigned to the mission, stood nearby with arms crossed behind his back. His species, the Corvani, were known throughout the galaxy for their strategic brilliance and unwavering loyalty to the collective. Where Velthar saw diplomatic opportunity, Korvex saw potential threat assessment data. Ambassador, I've reviewed the intercepted transmissions multiple times, Korvex said, his voice carrying the weight of military precision. Something about their communication patterns concerns me. There are layers beneath their basic signals, encryption methods that seem almost deliberately primitive. Velthar waved a dismissive hand. General, you see conspiracy where there is merely ignorance. These humans, as they call themselves, are broadcasting their location openly. They've agreed to meet us at coordinates they themselves suggested. What threat could such openness possibly represent? The diplomatic fleet had positioned itself in the traditional formation, 12 vessels arranged in a welcoming semicircle that had been refined over centuries of successful first contacts. Each ship bore the distinctive markings of the Nexus Collective, their hulls gleaming with the polished perfection that spoke of advanced civilization and peaceful intent. Captain Jenna Blackwood floated in the command center of humanity's response to the galactic invitation, but she was far from the primitive commander the aliens expected. The Crimson Dawn represented the pinnacle of human engineering, though its true capabilities were hidden beneath layers of careful misdirection and advanced stealth technology. Captain, we're approaching the rendezvous coordinates, reported Lieutenant Commander Harrison Webb, her second-in-command. Webb had served alongside Blackwood through the Mars colonial wars and understood the delicate nature of their current mission better than most. Sensor readings on the alien fleet? Blackwood asked, her fingers dancing across holographic displays. That would have seemed like magic to the humans of just 50 years earlier. 12 vessels, Captain. Standard diplomatic formation, no obvious weapon signatures, though their technology is significantly more advanced than what we've let them believe about us. Webb paused, consulting additional readouts. Their ships are beautiful, Captain. Artistic in ways our functional designs aren't. Blackwood nodded thoughtfully. Humanity's approach to this first contact had been debated in classified sessions for months. The decision to present themselves as less advanced than they truly were hadn't been made lightly, but recent intelligence gathered from deep space. Monitoring stations suggested the galaxy's established powers didn't always treat newcomers as equals. Initiate the Phantom Protocol, Blackwood commanded quietly. I want us to appear exactly as primitive as they expect, but keep all defensive systems at full readiness. The Crimson Dawn began to decelerate as it approached the alien fleet, but something was wrong with the picture the Nexus Collective had painted for themselves. The human vessel didn't announce itself with crude radio transmissions or stumbling attempts at galactic standard communication protocols. Instead, it simply appeared. One moment, the space around the diplomatic fleet was empty. The next moment, a vessel materialized from what seemed like nothingness. Not the clumsy emergence of a ship dropping out of hyperspace, but the fluid, almost organic appearance of something that had been there all along, choosing finally to be seen. General Korvex felt his tactical instincts screaming warnings as his sensors struggled to process what they were detecting. The human ship wasn't particularly large by collective standards, roughly equivalent to a light cruiser, but something about its presence set his nerves on edge. "Ambassador," he said carefully, "their ship just appeared on our sensors. Not approached, not dropped out of FTL. Appeared." Velthar frowned, his confidence wavering slightly. "Perhaps their technology is different than we assumed. Many species develop unique approaches to space travel." But Korvex was studying his tactical displays with growing concern. "Sir, I'm not reading any conventional engine signatures. No heat bloom, no particle emissions, no gravitational distortions. It's as if their ship is silent." The Crimson Dawn hung in space like a predator perfectly at rest. Its hull was a deep crimson that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect, giving it an almost liquid appearance against the starfield. Unlike the ornate vessels of the Nexus Collective, the human ship was purely functional. Every line serving a purpose, every surface optimized for performance rather than aesthetics. "Captain," Webb said quietly, "they're scanning us. Multiple sensor sweeps. Everything from basic electromagnetic to what feels like quantum resonance testing." "Let them look," Blackwood replied calmly. "They'll see exactly what we want them to see, a primitive vessel with basic propulsion and simple defensive capabilities." But aboard the Eternal Harmony, the sensor readings were painting a confusing picture. The human ship registered as primitive in some ways, advanced in others, and completely unreadable in still others. It was as if someone had deliberately built a vessel to confuse anyone trying to analyze it. "Begin standard first contact protocols," Velthar commanded, though his usual confidence had been replaced by careful caution. "Transmit the universal greeting and mathematical sequences." The message went out across multiple frequencies and formats. The carefully crafted diplomatic introduction that had opened peaceful relations with dozens of species across the galaxy. For long minutes there was no response from the Crimson vessel. Then, without warning, a response came back. Not through their communication systems, but as a direct holographic projection that appeared in the center of the Eternal Harmony's bridge. The image was crystal clear, showing a human female in what appeared to be a military uniform, standing in what was obviously a command center. "I am Captain Jenna Blackwood of the Earth vessel Crimson Dawn," the projection said, her voice carrying easily through the alien bridge despite the obvious impossibility of the transmission method. "We appreciate your invitation to this gathering and look forward to peaceful dialogue between our species." The projection flickered and vanished, leaving the Nexus delegation staring at empty space. Velthar felt his diplomatic composure cracking. In centuries of first contact procedures, no newly discovered species had ever demonstrated the capability to project holographic communications directly onto their vessels without prior technical exchange. "General," Velthar said slowly, "how did they do that?" Korvex was running diagnostics on every system aboard the ship, trying to understand how the humans had bypassed their shields, their security protocols, and their communication systems to place a hologram directly on their bridge. "I don't know, Ambassador. Our shields were up, our systems were secure, and there's no record of any incoming transmission. It's as if the image simply materialized from our own systems." The beautiful diplomatic formation of the Nexus Collective suddenly felt less like a welcome and more like a trap. Though neither side was quite sure who was the prey, the Crimson Dawn hung motionless in space, its dark hull revealing nothing of the technology or intentions of the species that had built it. Captain Blackwood stood on her own bridge, watching the alien vessels through sensors that were far more advanced than anything the Nexus Collective possessed. The careful game of diplomatic chess had begun, but unlike previous species that had joined the galactic community, humanity was playing by their own rules. "Captain," Webb said quietly, "their ships are beautiful, but their weapon signatures are impressive. If this goes wrong—" "It won't go wrong, Commander," Blackwood replied. "But if it does, they're about to learn that humanity didn't survive, becoming a spacefaring species by being the strongest or the fastest. We survived by being the most adaptable." The silence stretched between the two fleets, each side reassessing their assumptions about the other. In the depths of space, first contact had begun, But neither side was quite what the other had expected. The Nexus Collective had expected primitives, instead they faced a mystery. Humanity had expected diplomats, instead they faced a test. The real negotiations were about to begin. The diplomatic dance between species had begun, but neither side was following the expected choreography. 3 hours had passed since Captain Blackwood's holographic appearance on the Nexus Bridge, and the silence that followed spoke volumes about the miscalculations both sides had made. Dr. Nina Volkov stood in the Crimson Dawn's xenobiology lab, analyzing the detailed scans her ship's advanced sensors had taken of the alien vessels. Unlike the primitive equipment the Nexus Collective believed humans possessed, her instruments could penetrate their hull plating and analyze the biological signatures of every creature aboard their ships. "Fascinating," she murmured to her assistant, Dr. Marcus Chen, as holographic displays showed the internal structure of the alien vessels. 3 distinct species aboard their flagship alone. The tall, silver-skinned ones appear to be the diplomats. The shorter, more muscular ones with the ridge-lined skulls are clearly military, but there's a third group. Chen leaned closer to examine the data. The ones with the enlarged craniums and the additional sensory organs? Scientists, I believe. Or perhaps philosophers. Their brain activity patterns are unlike anything I've seen. They're not just thinking, they're processing information on multiple levels simultaneously. Volkov paused, her expression growing concerned. "Marcus, these beings are far more advanced than our intelligence suggested. This isn't going to be the simple diplomatic exchange Command hoped for." Meanwhile, aboard the Eternal Harmony, Regent Thylos had joined the diplomatic mission. As one of the Nexus Collective's senior council members, his presence indicated how seriously they were beginning to take this unexpected first contact scenario. Thylos belonged to the ethereal caste, beings whose lifespans measured in millennia, and whose understanding of galactic politics was unmatched. "Ambassador Velthar," Thylos said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, "explain to me how a species that broadcasts primitive radio signals managed to place a holographic projection directly onto our bridge." Velthar struggled to maintain his diplomatic composure. "Regent, we're still analyzing the technical aspects of their communication method. Perhaps they developed along different technological paths than we anticipated." General Korvex stepped forward, his tactical analysis complete. "Regent, with respect, this goes beyond different development paths. I've run every diagnostic we have. There's no trace of how they accomplished that transmission. Our security protocols should have made it impossible." Thylos studied the crimson vessel through the observation port, his ancient eyes seeing patterns that younger beings missed. "General, what are your tactical assessments of their ship?" "That's just it, Regent. I can't give you a proper assessment. Their vessel appears to be built from materials that absorb our scanning attempts. What we can detect suggests a ship roughly equivalent to our light cruisers, but..." Korvex hesitated. But the energy signatures don't match the apparent size or configuration. It's as if they're hiding something significant about their true capabilities. Commander Zara Torres stood at the tactical station aboard the Crimson Dawn, monitoring the increasingly agitated communications between the alien vessels. Her background in military intelligence had taught her to read between the lines of diplomatic exchanges, and what she was seeing concerned her. "Captain," she reported to Blackwood, "their internal communications are becoming more frequent and more encrypted. Whatever calm they're projecting externally, they're having serious discussions about us internally." Blackwood nodded, her fingers drumming against her command chair. "Any hostile movements?" "Not yet, but 3 of their escort vessels have shifted positions. Subtle, but they're creating better firing angles if this goes bad." Torres paused, consulting her displays. "Captain, I'm also detecting what appears to be a much larger vessel approaching from the outer system. Something big." The tension was building on both sides, fed by misunderstanding and the gradual realization that neither species was what the other had expected. The Nexus Collective prided itself on controlled, predictable first contact scenarios. Humanity had prepared for this meeting by assuming they would need to demonstrate strength from a position of apparent weakness. Dr. Volkov's analysis was painting an increasingly complex picture of the aliens they faced. "Captain, I need to report something significant. Based on bioscans of their vessels, these beings aren't just advanced, they're old. Some of the individuals aboard their flagship have biological markers suggesting lifespans of several centuries, possibly longer." Meaning? Meaning they've likely conducted dozens, maybe hundreds of first contact scenarios. They have experience with this process that we simply don't possess. But that also means they're expecting us to follow patterns established by other species. Blackwood considered this information carefully. Humanity's advantage had always been adaptability, the ability to respond to situations in unexpected ways. But if they were dealing with beings who had centuries of experience in galactic diplomacy, conventional approaches might not be sufficient. "Dr. Volkov, what's your recommendation?" "We need to be careful not to appear deceptive, but we also can't allow them to categorize us based on their previous encounters. Every species they've met before has probably followed similar patterns of development. We need to show them that humanity doesn't fit their established models." The stalemate continued for several more hours, each side probing the other with careful sensor sweeps and diplomatic feelers. The Nexus Collective sent formal invitations for face-to-face meetings, following protocols that had worked with dozens of previous species. Humanity responded with polite acknowledgments and requests for more detailed cultural exchange information. But beneath the diplomatic courtesy, both sides were growing increasingly suspicious of the other's true intentions. Regent. Thalos finally decided to take a more direct approach. Using the same communication frequencies the humans had used for their holographic display, he transmitted a message directly to the Crimson Dawn. "Captain Blackwood, I am Regent Thalos of the Nexus Collective Council. Your species has demonstrated capabilities that suggest a level of technological development inconsistent with our previous observations. In the interest of preventing misunderstandings that could lead to unfortunate consequences, perhaps it would be beneficial for us to speak more directly about our respective positions." The response came not as another holographic projection, but as a direct neural interface communication that bypassed their ship's communication systems entirely and spoke directly into the minds of every being aboard the Nexus vessels. The voice was Captain Blackwood's, but the method of delivery was impossible by any technology the collective understood. "Regent Thalos, humanity appreciates your direct approach. We are indeed not what your initial assessment suggested, just as you are clearly more than our intelligence indicated. Perhaps it's time we both acknowledge that this first contact is proceeding along lines neither of us anticipated." The neural communication ended, leaving the Nexus delegation staring at each other in shock. Direct neural interface across species barriers without prior biological compatibility studies was theoretical at best, impossible at worst. "How are they doing this?" Velthar whispered. General Korvex was running emergency protocols, trying to determine if the neural communication represented an attack or simply an advanced form of diplomacy. "Regent, I strongly recommend we prepare for the possibility that this species represents a significant threat to collective security." But Thalos was thinking beyond immediate tactical concerns. In his centuries of experience, he had never encountered a species that could casually demonstrate technologies the collective didn't understand. The implications went far beyond a simple first contact scenario. "General, prepare the fleet for any contingency, but do not take aggressive action without my direct authorization." Thalos turned to Velthar. "Ambassador, it appears we may be dealing with a species that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in this region of the galaxy." Aboard the Crimson Dawn, Captain Blackwood was reaching similar conclusions about the aliens they faced. The Nexus Collective wasn't simply another galactic civilization. They were clearly a dominant power with the resources and experience to either welcome humanity as equals or view them as a threat to be contained. "Captain," Commander Torres reported, "that large vessel I detected earlier is definitely approaching. Based on sensor readings, it's a Dreadnought-class warship, possibly their flagship. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. They're calling in reinforcements," Blackwood mused. "The question is whether they view us as potential allies worth impressing, or potential threats requiring containment." Dr. Volkov looked up from her analysis station. Captain, based on their biological readings and communication patterns, I believe they're experiencing something they rarely encounter. Uncertainty. These beings are accustomed to being the most advanced species in any given situation. Our capabilities are forcing them to reassess their assumptions. The diplomatic situation was becoming increasingly complex. Both sides possessed advanced technologies the other didn't fully understand. Both sides were beginning to realize that their initial assumptions about the other had been dangerously incomplete. And both sides were now faced with the question of whether this first contact would lead to alliance or conflict. The arrival of the Nexus dreadnought would force both species to make decisions that could determine the future relationship between humanity and the galactic community. Captain Blackwood prepared her crew for whatever might come next, while Regent Thylos contemplated whether humanity represented the greatest opportunity or the greatest threat the Nexus Collective had encountered in centuries. The shadows of misunderstanding were deepening, and both sides were beginning to realize that this first contact would be unlike any that had come before. The massive Nexus dreadnought, Infinite Majesty, dropped out of hyperspace like a mountain, materializing from nothing. Its arrival sent ripples through local spacetime that both fleets felt as a deep, resonant hum through their hull plating. Admiral Jackson Pike stood on its bridge, his weathered features bearing the marks of someone who had commanded fleets through the bloodiest conflicts in Nexus history. Regent Thylos, Pike's voice carried across the communication channel with military precision. I received your emergency summons. What exactly are we dealing with here? Thylos responded through encrypted channels, his ancient wisdom struggling with unprecedented circumstances. Admiral, we face a species that defies our understanding. They present themselves as primitive, yet demonstrate technologies we cannot explain or counter. Pike studied the tactical displays showing the small crimson vessel hanging motionless between the two fleets. One ship against our entire diplomatic fleet, and now my dreadnought? Regent, surely you're not suggesting a single vessel poses a threat to the combined might of the Nexus Collective. But even as Pike spoke, his tactical officers were feeding him sensor data that made no sense. The human ship showed no signs of concern at the arrival of the most powerful warship in the Nexus fleet. If anything, it seemed to have become more watchful. Captain Rosa Mendez materialized on the bridge of the Infinite Majesty through the same impossible holographic projection technology that had been baffling the Nexus representatives. Unlike Captain Blackwood's formal military bearing, Mendez carried herself with the confident ease of someone accustomed to exploring the unknown. Admiral Pike, she said, her voice carrying across the alien bridge as if she were standing right there. I'm Captain Rosa Mendez representing the Earth Exploration Command. I believe there's been some misunderstanding about our intentions and capabilities. Pike felt the same unsettling sensation his colleagues had experienced. The hologram was perfect, showing not just visual representation but somehow conveying presence in a way that defied explanation. Captain Mendez, how are you accomplishing this communication method? Mendez smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both friendly and mysterious. Admiral, that's part of what we'd like to discuss. You see, humanity has been watching your collective for some time. We've been learning about your customs, your technologies, your approaches to diplomacy. We didn't want our first meeting to be uncomfortable. The words hung in the space between species like a challenge wrapped in courtesy. Admiral Pike realized that everything they thought they knew about this first contact scenario had been carefully orchestrated by the humans. You've been watching us? Pike asked, his military instincts screaming warnings. Of course, wouldn't you do the same? Mendez's projection gestured toward the display screens around Pike's bridge. You've been scanning our ship for hours trying to understand our technology. We've been doing the same, but apparently with better results. Aboard the Crimson Dawn, Captain Blackwood was coordinating with a figure who had remained hidden until now. Seer Zendis materialized in the human ship's conference room, not through technology but through abilities that transcended physical limitations. The ancient being was older than the Nexus Collective itself, a remnant from the galaxy's distant past who had been quietly observing the rise and fall of civilizations for millennia. Captain Blackwood, Zendis spoke through communication methods that bypassed language entirely, communicating directly through concepts and understanding. The time for careful revelation has come. Your species stands at a crossroads that will determine not just your future, but the future of this entire galactic region. Blackwood nodded, having expected this moment since humanity first detected the Nexus Collective's communications. Seer, are you prepared to reveal the truth about what humanity really represents? The truth, Captain, is more complex than either your species or the collective realizes. Humanity didn't develop in isolation. Your rapid technological advancement, your unusual capabilities, your adaptability, these traits were not accidents of evolution. The revelation began slowly, with Seer Zendis appearing simultaneously aboard every vessel in both fleets. The ancient being's presence was impossible to ignore or explain away, forcing both sides to confront truths that challenged their fundamental understanding of galactic history. Long ago, Zendis began, addressing both fleets simultaneously. This galaxy was home to a species known as the Architects. They seeded worlds, guided evolution, and established the foundations upon which all current civilizations were built. The Nexus Collective's advanced technology, their diplomatic protocols, their understanding of galactic politics, all of it was built upon structures the Architects left behind. Admiral Pike felt his worldview shifting as Zendis continued. But the Architects didn't simply vanish. They planted seeds throughout the galaxy, genetic and technological markers that would activate when the galaxy reached a certain level of development. Humanity represents the maturation of one of those seeds. Captain Blackwood stepped forward, her image now appearing alongside Zendis on every bridge. The technologies you've seen us demonstrate aren't just human innovations. They're the result of ancient programming activating as our species reached the appropriate developmental triggers. We're not just another species seeking to join the galactic community. We're the inheritors of the civilization that created the foundation for that community. The implications hit both fleets like a shockwave. The Nexus Collective's entire identity was built around being the galaxy's premier civilization, the species that brought order and advancement to primitive worlds. But if humanity represented a direct link to the Architects, everything they believed about galactic hierarchy was wrong. Regent Thylos was the first to understand the full scope of what they were facing. You're saying that humanity is not just another species but the activation of ancient protocols that predate our entire civilization? More than that, Seer Zendis replied. Humanity's emergence signals that this galaxy is ready for the next phase of development. The careful balance the Nexus Collective has maintained for centuries was always intended to be temporary. The Architects designed their systems to guide civilizations to this point, where inherited wisdom could merge with naturally evolved capabilities. Captain Rosa Mendez took over the explanation, her holographic presence somehow becoming more solid, more real. We're not here to conquer or to replace the Nexus Collective. We're here to propose something that has never existed in this galaxy, a true partnership between the inheritors of ancient wisdom and the civilizations that evolved naturally to deserve that wisdom. Admiral Pike struggled to process the magnitude of what he was hearing. What kind of partnership? The kind that will allow this galaxy to defend itself against what's coming, Captain Blackwood replied grimly. Seer Zendis, show them. The ancient being's consciousness expanded, sharing visions that chilled both fleets to their cores. Images of vast dark ships moving through the void between galaxies. Civilizations consumed not through conquest but through a form of absorption that left nothing behind but empty worlds and silent space. The Devourers, Zendis explained. They moved from galaxy to galaxy, consuming not just resources but the very essence of civilizations. They were the reason the Architects seeded their protocols throughout this galaxy. They knew that someday, their descendants would need the combined strength of inherited technology and evolved wisdom to survive what's coming. The revelation changed everything. The careful diplomatic dance between humanity and the Nexus Collective suddenly seemed petty compared to the existential threat approaching from beyond their galaxy's borders. How long do we have? Admiral Pike asked, his military mind already shifting into strategic planning mode. Based on our calculations, Perhaps 50 years before the first scout ships arrive, Captain Mendez replied. Enough time to build the kind of alliance that can face them, but only if we start now. Regent Thylos felt the weight of decisions settling on his ancient shoulders. Everything the Nexus Collective had built, everything they had achieved, would mean nothing if they couldn't adapt to this new reality. What do you propose? He asked. Captain Blackwood stepped forward, her presence somehow commanding attention from beings whose lifespans measured in centuries. We propose the formation of the Galactic Defense Alliance, not a hierarchy with the Nexus Collective at the top or humanity as inheritors of ancient authority, but a true partnership where each species contributes their unique strengths to our common defense. The Nexus Collective brings centuries of diplomatic experience, established trade networks, and proven technologies. Humanity brings the awakened protocols of the architects and the adaptability that comes from evolving without ancient guidance. Together, we can build something neither of our civilizations could achieve alone. The silence that followed was heavy with potential. Both fleets hung in space, their crews and commanders contemplating a future that bore no resemblance to what any of them had imagined when this first contact began. Admiral Pike was the first to break the silence. Captain Blackwood, if what you're saying is true, then we don't have the luxury of slow diplomatic negotiations. We need to begin integration immediately. Seer Zendis nodded approvingly. The wisdom of both species emerges. Admiral Captain, Regent, the future of this galaxy now rests in your hands. The architects planted the seeds, but it falls to you to nurture them into the defense this galaxy will need. As the ancient being's presence faded, both fleets began the complex process of reimagining their relationship. What had begun as a routine first contact had become the foundation for an alliance that would reshape galactic civilization. The Crimson Dawn had brought more than humanity's introduction to the galaxy. It had brought the revelation that would unite civilizations against the darkness approaching from beyond the stars. The Crimson Vessel hung between the fleets no longer as a mystery to be solved, but as a symbol of the partnership that would define the galaxy's future.